All right, every October you see them everywhere, grinning, glowing faces carved into pumpkins sitting on our doorsteps. It's a tradition so familiar, right? We barely even think about it. But behind that flickering smile, there's a story that is ancient, surprisingly dark, and stretches back thousands of years. Let's dig in and find out what's really behind that glowing grin. So, what's the deal here? Why this specific ritual? Why do we carve pumpkins of all things? And yeah, the biggest question of all, who is the Jack in Jack-o'-lantern? Well, the answer is this incredible piece of folklore, a story that literally traveled across oceans and centuries just to land right on your front porch. Before we meet the man himself, we've got to get one thing straight. This whole tradition, it didn't start as a fun, family-friendly activity. Nope, it began as something way more serious. A ritual born from these ancient beliefs about life, death, and, the spirits that walk between worlds. What we now see as this cheerful welcome for trick-or-treaters actually started out as a pretty grim tool for protection. Its main job was to ward off wandering spirits. The journey of this symbol, from a sign of fear to a beacon of fun, well, that's the story we're going to unpack right now. And that story really kicks off with one man. The legend that actually gave the lantern its name is a classic Irish folktale from the 18th century, and it tells the tale of a cunning and, let's be honest, a pretty cruel guy named Jack. So this guy, Stingy Jack, was by all accounts just a miserable character. A deceitful blacksmith who got his kicks from tricking everyone he met. He was so clever and so cruel that he actually decided to try and outsmart the devil himself. As the story goes, Jack invites the devil out for a drink. But true to his name, Stingy Jack had no intention of paying. So he convinces the devil to turn himself into a silver coin, but instead of using it to pay, Jack just slips the coin into his pocket right next to a silver cross he was carrying. This trapped the devil in coin form. The only way out? The devil had to promise not to bother Jack for 1 full year. A year later, of course, the devil returns to claim Jack's soul. But Jack was ready. He manages to trick the devil again, this time talking him into climbing high up an apple tree to grab a piece of fruit. And while the devil was up in the branches, Jack quickly carves crosses all around the trunk of the tree, trapping him once more. Trapped and, I'm guessing, absolutely furious, the devil had to listen to Jack's final demand. Jack made the devil swear that when he died, his soul would never, ever be taken to hell. Having no choice, the devil agreed. And that deal, right there, would seal Jack's fate forever. So, what happens to Jack? Well, years later, when he finally died, he heads up to the gates of heaven. But he was turned away. His life had just been far too mean and cruel. So, he goes down to the gates of hell. But the devil, being true to his word, refused him entry there too. So now Jack is just lost, trapped in this dark netherworld between heaven and hell. With nowhere to go, he asks the devil how he's supposed to see in the eternal darkness. And in this final, kind of ironic gesture, the devil tosses him a single burning ember from the flames of hell itself. Jack, who just so happened to be carrying a turnip, hauls it out, places the burning coal inside, and begins his endless journey roaming the earth. And he became known as Jack of the Lantern, or, as we've shortened it today, Jack-o'-lantern. Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. That whole folktale of Stingy Jack, it probably came about to explain a much, much older tradition. See, the original point of these lanterns wasn't to tell a story, but to provide some very real spiritual protection. This all goes back to the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. It was celebrated at the end of the harvest season, and it was a time when the Celts believed the boundary, the veil between our world and the spirit world, was at its absolute thinnest, allowing ghosts and all sorts of supernatural beings to just walk the earth. So to protect themselves during this spiritually dangerous time, people in Ireland and Scotland started carving these grotesque, really frightening faces into vegetables. They placed these ghoulish lanterns outside their homes to frighten away the wandering spirit of Stingy Jack and, any other evil ghosts that might be lurking around. But they were not carving pumpkins. Back in the British Isles, carvers used whatever root vegetables they had a lot of. Turnips, potatoes, beets, rutabagas. Can you imagine trying to carve one of those? They were small, they were hard, and they were incredibly difficult to work with, but they got the job done. And this might point to an even deeper history. Some historians think the whole practice dates back over 2,000 years to something called the Celtic cult of the head. The Celts believed the head was basically the seat of the soul and a source of incredible power, so carving faces held this huge spiritual meaning. So, if the original lanterns were all carved from turnips and potatoes, how in the world did we end up with the pumpkin as the icon of Halloween? Well, the answer lies in a story of migration and, really, just practical adaptation. This timeline lays it all out perfectly. You have this ancient Celtic practice that existed for centuries. Then, the Stingy Jack story comes along and gives it a whole new narrative. Fast forward to the mid-1800s, millions of Irish immigrants, fleeing the Great Famine, bring this tradition with them to America. And there, they discovered a brand new, and frankly, a much better canvas. The pumpkin was native to North America, and for the Irish immigrants, it was an absolute game changer. I mean, look at the difference here. Compared to those small, dense turnips they were used to, pumpkins were bigger, they were softer, and they were so much easier to carve. The tradition adapted to its new home, and the pumpkin pretty much instantly became the new standard. And it wasn't just the vegetable that changed. With that change in canvas came a really profound change in meaning. The jack-o'-lantern was about to complete its final transformation, from a symbol of fear to one of fun. So think about this contrast for a second. What started as a symbol of a damned soul and a protective talisman to literally ward off evil has now become this festive beacon of community. It's no longer meant to scare things away, it's an invitation, a sign that your home is a welcoming place for celebration. When you really stop and think about it, the longevity of this one tradition is just staggering. It's a direct line connecting the pumpkin on your porch today to ancient Celtic rituals that were practiced more than 2,000 years ago. Wow. That carved pumpkin is so much more than just a decoration. It's a symbol of a story that has changed and evolved as people have moved across the world. A story of how we deal with the darkness, first with fear and now with fun and community. And that kind of leaves me wondering, the story of the jack-o'-lantern is this powerful reminder that behind our most common traditions, there are often these incredible histories just waiting to be discovered. What other ancient stories might be hiding in plain sight in your own life? All right, let's talk Halloween, specifically trick-or-treating. Today, we're going to unwrap the totally bizarre and fascinating history of one of our favorite traditions. I mean, really stop and think about that for a second. It's something we all just do. But it's actually a pretty strange ritual, isn't it? Well, the answer is a wild story that takes us through ancient spirits, medieval Europe, and a uniquely American invention. Okay, so to figure this all out, we have to go way, way back, over 2,000 years in fact, to a Celtic festival called Samhain. So picture this. During Samhain, the Celts believed the veil between our world and the spirit world got so thin that ghosts could just wander right through. And that belief led to two customs that are going to sound super familiar. So get this, the first treats were basically bribes for ghosts, left outside so they'd leave you alone. And the first costumes? They were disguises, so a malevolent spirit wouldn't recognize you. This wasn't about fun, this was serious spiritual protection. Now, let's see how that all changes as we move into the medieval era. So, fast forward a few centuries. As Christianity spreads, these old pagan ideas don't just vanish. Nope, they kind of get a makeover. They blend with new church traditions, and that mashup creates two new customs that involve going door to door: souling and guising. And this is where the path kind of splits in two, and it's super interesting. On one hand, you have souling, which was this deeply serious religious custom. On the other hand, you have guising, which was basically like a traveling neighborhood talent show. This chart really breaks it down, right? So howling was a straight-up transaction, prayers for cake. But look at guising, that is where things get really familiar. You had to perform to get your treat, a song, a joke, whatever. The trick was actually your talent. So, we have prayers for cake, and we have poems for nuts. How in the world did that turn into a playful threat? Well, for that part of the story, we have to cross the Atlantic to North America, where things took a mischievous turn. See, when those traditions arrived in the New World, they collided with a uniquely American problem. Halloween here was getting a little out of control. We're talking less about fun and more about straight-up vandalism. So communities were kind of desperate to get a handle on the chaos. And out of that chaos, the phrase trick or treat was born. But notice how the meaning totally flips. It's not, I'll do a trick for a treat anymore. It's now, give me a treat or I'll pull a trick on you. It's basically a little bit of friendly extortion. And you've got to love this, not everyone was on board at first. I mean, check out this headline. Some adults were genuinely worried. They looked at these kids demanding treats and saw, and I quote, the gangsters of tomorrow. Seriously, it just shows you how much anxiety was in the air at the time. Okay, so the phrase is in place, but we're still not at the point where kids are hauling pillowcases full of candy. For that to happen, we needed a perfect storm of events, and it all kicked off right after World War II. It was like the perfect recipe. First, you get the baby boom and the explosion of suburbs. Boom, tons of kids and safe, walkable neighborhoods. Then, the candy industry jumps in with the perfect product, cheap, individually wrapped sweets. And the cherry on top? The Trick or Treat for UNICEF campaign gave the whole thing a wholesome, charitable angle. It made it feel not just fun, but, good. And that really is the final piece of the puzzle. Before the 50s, you might get an apple or some nuts. But by the 70s, it was all about prepackaged candy. It was easier, and frankly, people started getting worried about safety. And that right there is why we get candy bars instead of soul cakes. So when you put it all together, what we call trick-or-treating is this amazing mashup. It's got the ancient costumes, the medieval door-to-door hustle, that uniquely American ultimatum, all wrapped up in a shiny commercial package. It's a pretty wild journey, isn't it? From trying to pacify ancient spirits to debating the merits of candy corn. And I think what's so cool about this is it shows that even our simplest, most fun traditions are packed with these incredibly complex, whining histories. Something to think about next time you open a fun-sized candy bar. Thanks for tuning in.
So every October, the world kind of transforms, right? You see them everywhere. Graining pumpkins, those spooky black cats, witches on broomsticks. It's all so familiar. You probably don't even give it a second thought. But what if I told you that every single one of those symbols has a secret history, a wild story full of ancient gods, power plays, and major culture clashes? Well, today we're going to unpack all of that.
I mean, you know the lineup. You've got the classic witch, right? Pointed hat, big bubbling cauldron, the whole deal.
You've got that glowing, grinning pumpkin sitting on the front porch.
And yeah, of course, there's always that mysterious black cat, slinking through the shadows.
So, have you ever actually stopped to wonder where all this stuff comes from? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do. Let's really get into it and unpack the real stories behind our spookiest traditions. You'll see it's this incredible mix of ancient folklore, big religious changes, and even human migration.
All right, let's start with the absolute basics, the colors. We're talking more than just orange and black here. It might seem like just a spooky aesthetic, but trust me, there's a lot of meaning packed into that color scheme.
Okay, so that classic orange and black combo, that's not random at all. It comes straight from an ancient Celtic festival called Samhain. Think of it as marking the end of the harvest and the beginning of winter. The orange, that's all about the harvest, the autumn leaves, and these huge bonfires they'd light. It's like the last bit of warmth and life for the season. And the black, well, that represents the death of summer and the long, dark winter ahead. It was also tied to the idea that the veil between the living and the dead was at its thinnest. So yeah, it's literally all about that cycle of life and death.
But it's not just orange and black. The full Halloween palette is way bigger. Think about it. You see a lot of purple, right? That's all about mysticism, magic, and witchcraft. Then there's green. It can be about nature, sure, but for Halloween it's more about monsters and something feeling kind of evil. And of course, you've got red. Red is super primal. It's life, it's blood, and it's definitely a universal sign for danger.
All right, so now that we've got the colors down, let's talk about maybe the most central figure of Halloween, the witch. And this is a big one. We're going to see how we went from a wise woman to a wicked hag. Today, we think of a witch as, a cartoon on a broomstick. But her real story? It's way, way darker. It's really a story about how a figure of wisdom was deliberately twisted into a symbol of pure evil. And you can really see that transformation right here. I mean, just look at this. On one side, you have this old woodcut. It's dark, it's scary, it's genuinely menacing. And then on the other side, a modern Halloween costume. It's totally playful, completely harmless. So the big question is, what happened? How on earth did we get from a figure of absolute terror to a fun party costume.
Well, let me tell you, this was no accident. It was basically a long, deliberate rebranding campaign. Get this, the word witch actually comes from an Old English word witchy, which meant wise woman. So a wise woman was a keeper of knowledge, someone who understood nature. A far cry from evil, right? But then, over centuries, you see these church texts pop up, like the Canon Episcopi, that start reframing these old beliefs as demonic. And then came the big one. In 1487, a book was published that directly linked women to evil magic and pacts with the devil. And that changed everything.
That book was called the Malleus Maleficarum, which literally translates to the Hammer of Witches, and it was pretty much a witch-hunting manual. This quote from it really says it all. All wickedness is but little to the wickedness of a woman. I mean, whoa. The book's whole argument was just deeply, deeply misogynistic. It basically said that because women were weaker and more carnal, they were way more likely to fall for the devil's tricks. This text gave people the justification they needed to start persecuting women on a massive scale.
And the result was just horrifying. We're talking an estimated 40,000 people, most of them women, were executed as witches in Europe over a few hundred years. This isn't just some spooky fairy tale. This was a real-life horror story. And it's that dark, terrifying history that's been almost completely erased and sanitized into the cutesy Halloween decorations we buy today.
Okay, so from witches, let's move on to their companions. You know, the creatures of the night, familiars, phantoms, all the classic folklore critters. And believe me, their stories are just as wild.
So let's start with the black cat. Now here's something you might not know. They didn't start out as a symbol of bad luck, not at all. In fact, in Celtic folklore, black cats were seen as fairies in disguise. They were thought to be these powerful beings that could move between our world and the spirit world. They could even bring you good fortune.
So what happened? Well, their reputation took a massive nosedive in the Middle Ages. In 1232, Pope Gregory IX issued a declaration that officially linked black cats with Satan. And just like that, their public image was ruined. They went from being these magical, good luck creatures to being symbols of evil, forever tied to witchcraft.
And it wasn't just the black cat that got a bad rap. A lot of other animals got swept up in this too. Bats, for example. I mean, they're nocturnal, they live in caves, so it's kind of easy to see how they got linked to darkness, death, and vampire stories from all over the world. Spiders, well, they hang out in dark, abandoned places, so they became the perfect symbol for haunted houses. And owls, their silent flight and that haunting hooting sound, yeah, ancient cultures totally saw them as connected to the supernatural and as omens of death.
So, when you really think about it, these Halloween symbols are so much more than just decorations, aren't they? They're basically artifacts of history. Every time you see a jack-o'-lantern or a witch on a broomstick, you're looking at a living piece of history that's been woven together from ancient pagan beliefs, intense religious struggles, folklore, and the incredible stories of people who carried their traditions all the way across an ocean.
I mean, it's pretty amazing how much these symbols have changed over the centuries, right? We've gone from wise women to wicked witches, from magical fairies to unlucky cats, and from carved turnips to giant pumpkins. It all makes you wonder, doesn't it? As our own culture keeps changing, what will these symbols mean in the future? How are we going to shape their story next?